I never see another birthday. It's over with, Joe. If you fucking love me, say that shit now, cause this gonna be the last time they never say it. If you love me, nigga, you really love me, nigga, call my phone, cause this gonna be the last time you gonna be able to say it, Joe. I just fucked up. It ain't nothing I can do about it. I just fucked up, bro. I love that woman dearly, bro. I love her dearly, bro. I love that lady dearly, bro. On my soul, bro. On my soul, Joe. Like, I'm hurt like a motherfucker. I'm hurt like a motherfucker, Joe, because I can't even believe I just did. And I don't even know what just pushed me to snap like that, Joe. I don't even know what just pushed me to snap like that, Joe. That shit, I just lost it. I just lost it, bro. It's over with. It's over with, Joe.
They say when danger meets desperation, the sound of a single gunshot can echo in someone's mind forever. But imagine that gunshot echoing not once, not twice, but 11 times. On a quiet February evening in Chicago, the unthinkable unfolded. Lasagna Agee, a mother fighting to break free from years of abuse, was ambushed and shot 11 times, while her 3-year-old son was there. Miraculously, she survived. But that night would mark the beginning of one of the most chilling domestic violence cases Chicago has ever seen. Before we continue, if you're new here, hit subscribe to True Crime Watch HD and ring the bell so you never miss the kind of stories we dig into. We unravel the layers, expose hidden truths, and bring light to darkness. Now this is just the moment where the horror becomes undeniable. But the real story, the manipulations, the threats, the pieces that led her abuser to that final act, those we must trace back. Because what happened that night wasn't random, it was built. From the outside, Lasagna's life looked almost ordinary, a woman working hard, raising a child, but inside it was crumbling. Her son's father, Larry Sistrunk, became obsessively controlling. Neighbors later described sudden mood swings, jealous rages, and a man who would not let go. Over the months, calls escalated, surveillance followed, threats were everywhere. But Lasagna held on to hope and tried to reclaim her life. She moved houses, changed jobs, filed for restraining orders, even temporarily lost custody of her son, fearful Larry would use it against her to track her. Yet despite all those efforts, she never realized just how close the danger always was. Let me take you back to the beginning. Lasagna and Larry met years before the shooting. At first, it seemed like typical early romance, love, promise, a child. But the signs at the edges were already there. Accusations of cheating, verbal abuse, controlling behaviors about who she talked to, where she went. Friends noticed she looked over her shoulder more often. Calls would come late at night, demanding explanations. The red flags were mounting, but love and denial created a fog. Then came the escalation, public humiliation, shamming, and isolating her from support. She was gaslit when she questioned him. He told her she was ungrateful, unstable, overreacting. Those closest to her began to fear for her safety, but Lasagna held onto the conviction that things would change. By 2020, things had escalated. Larry was demanding to know her schedules, her finances, her friends. She started receiving ominous texts. "You'll pay. You can't hide." She would reach out to police, file complaints. In several instances, protective orders were sought. Yet each time, Larry skirted just outside of them, watching, waiting. Lasagna retreated, compartmentalizing her fear. She would tell no one the full scale of her terror. The neighbors heard arguments, but nothing that convinced them to call the cops. She didn't want to draw more attention, more danger. Meanwhile, Larry began to grow bolder. Social media footprints, location pings, sudden appearances outside her home. On more than one occasion, he would show up unannounced. She changed her phone number. She notified former coworkers not to post updates publicly. She deleted her social media. Her life became a fortress built in secret. But fortresses fall. It was February 21, 2021, a Sunday evening that began like many others. Lasagna had just returned from work, preparing dinner, having tucked her son into a routine. She believed that, for now, the danger was held at bay. Larry's presence, though, loomed closer than she thought. He had somehow traced her new car, via a public post she now regrets sharing and used that as a waypoint. Around 6:00 p.m., witnesses say they heard a car screeching. He confronted her as she stood in her driveway. She refused to get in his vehicle. That refusal sealed her fate. In a blur, he drew his gun and began firing. 11 shots in total. 4 struck Lasagna. Others went wild, hitting her grandmother and her uncle, who had rushed into the chaos to protect her. Even her 3-year-old son was grazed by a bullet. In that moment, the world fractured. Larry then recorded a live confession on Facebook, turning his crime into a spectacle. He fled the scene before police arrived. Lasagna, bloodied, broken, but still alive, fought through. Her uncle, her grandmother, miracles of resilience. Life and death teetered at the edge. When officers arrived, it was already too late to stop the carnage, but not too late to begin the hunt. At her side, her family cradled her. She whispered survival. Her son was clutched in someone's arms, shock in his eyes. The night air held a kind of silence broken only by sirens and the dread that comes after violence. Chicago was stunned. How could someone carry so much rage, so much obsession, and maintain it in secret? The investigation began immediately. Detectives combed through her phone, her messages, his messages. They interviewed friends, colleagues, neighbors. They examined GPS data, his past complaints, and prior police reports. 2 facts emerged almost immediately. 1, Larry had tried to silence her over time. 2, he intended this moment to be final. The public confession livestream was not an afterthought, it was a statement. But the trail seemed to vanish once he fled. He headed south, crossing state lines, hiding. A manhunt ensued, and here is where the tension builds. Would he be caught before he struck again? Meanwhile, Lasagna's condition was dire. Multiple surgeries, blood transfusions, weeks spent in ICU. Every breath she drew was a victory. Calloused hands held her son when she couldn't. She refused to die. She gave investigators what she could, whispered names, recollected details in between bouts of pain. The medical staff called her a warrior. She became more than a victim, she was a beacon. Her will to live became the engine driving a community to demand justice. By March, clues were surfacing. A tip led authorities to Louisiana. A car matching his vehicle was spotted. A local driver saw someone matching his description. But would that tip lead to a capture or to more bloodshed? And Lasagna, fragile but determined, began to speak publicly, urging reform, exposing failures, warning others. Yet as she found her voice, Larry still had his. When the gunfire stopped, silence took over Chicago's south side. But that silence was deceptive. It wasn't peace. It was the sound of shock, of confusion, of neighbors trying to process what they had just witnessed. Larry Sistrunk was gone, vanished into the night like the smoke from his gun, but not before doing something that no one could have predicted. He picked up his phone and went live on Facebook. "Man, I love that woman dearly. Bro, I can't even believe what I just did." That's what Larry told thousands of viewers, who suddenly found themselves staring into the digital face of a man who had just unleashed chaos on his family. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't running, at least not yet. He was explaining himself to the world, switching between anger, regret, and denial. His tone broke and hardened with every sentence. 1 second, remorse. The next, justification. But behind those rambling words was something far more chilling. The self-pity of a man who wanted to control how the story would be told. And this time, the world was watching. As police secured the scene, Chicago detectives began piecing together the evidence. They had the casings, the victims, and a live stream that left little doubt about who pulled the trigger. The challenge was who, it was where. Larry had fled the state. Detectives tracked his vehicle on license plate readers heading south, past the Illinois border. They issued a BOLO alert to agencies across multiple states. The Chicago Police Department worked with U.S. Marshals to coordinate an interstate manhunt. Meanwhile, Lasagna was clinging to life. 11 bullet wounds all below her waist. Her pelvis and right leg shattered, her liver torn. Her grandmother and uncle, both struck 8 times, were in critical condition. Doctors called it miraculous that all 3 survived. At the University of Chicago Medical Center, Lasagna woke up surrounded by wires and monitors. The first thing she said wasn't about pain, it was about her son. "Is he okay?" she whispered. He was. He had watched the entire attack but escaped unharmed physically. Emotionally, that would take years to heal. And as she lay there, piecing together the fragments of that day, her first coherent sentence to reporters would become a rallying cry. "He hit me 11 times. That's how many times he hit me. It's not worth it." When word spread that Lasagna had survived, Chicago rallied. Her story made the evening news. Her calm, matter-of-fact recounting of events stunned viewers. There was no hatred in her voice, just clarity. She told the world how she'd filed reports, how she'd begged for protection, how restraining orders had failed to keep Larry away. "He was trying to kill me and leave no witnesses," she said from her hospital bed. Her words echoed across the city. For every woman who'd been told it's not that serious, for every victim dismissed as dramatic or emotional, Lasagna became a voice. And the public wanted justice. Within days, law enforcement traced Larry's phone activity to Louisiana. He had relatives there, and authorities suspected he was trying to hide among family. Marshals staked out properties, monitored calls, and waited. The Facebook Live videos he'd posted continued to circulate online, haunting both investigators and the victims' loved ones. In those recordings, Larry alternated between saying he loved Lasagna and insisting he just snapped. But forensic psychologists reviewing the tapes saw something else, a man rehearsing his own justification. He wasn't remorseful, he was rewriting reality. After more than a week on the run, a tip came through. A man matching his description was seen entering an apartment on Mary Jane Street in Mansura, Louisiana. Marshals surrounded the area quietly, coordinating with local police. Early that morning, they made their move. Larry was arrested without resistance. Inside the apartment, officers found his phone, a half-packed bag, and a loaded firearm, though it wasn't the same gun used in the shooting. The arrest brought a collective sigh of relief to Chicago, but for Lasagna, the fear didn't instantly fade. She told a reporter, "Even knowing he's behind bars, I still sleep with the lights on." Detectives returned to the evidence. Security footage from multiple angles showed Larry circling Lasagna's neighborhood several times before the attack. Prosecutors later said this proved premeditation. It wasn't a moment of passion, it was a plan. They also found messages, hundreds of texts filled with threats, apologies, and pleas. One read, "If you can't be with me, nobody will." Others were worse, detailed descriptions of following her, of watching her from a distance. Every message told the same story: control. Police also discovered that Larry had a history of domestic-related charges, most of which were dropped after reconciliation attempts or lack of cooperation from victims. Lasagna's case wasn't his first, just the first that gained national attention. When confronted with the evidence, Larry reportedly said, "I just wanted her to listen." Those words, cold and simple, became symbolic of the entitlement that drives so many domestic abuse cases. When Larry was extradited back to Illinois, prosecutors filed 3 counts of attempted murder and 3 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm. During hearings, his demeanor shifted, sometimes quiet, sometimes volatile. His defense argued mental distress, that he snapped due to emotional trauma. The prosecution countered with meticulous evidence, surveillance footage, ballistic analysis, and the live streams that left no room for confusion. Witnesses testified about Lasagna's repeated attempts to escape. Police officers admitted, under oath, that multiple protective orders had been issued but not adequately enforced. It was a public embarrassment for the system that had failed her. During one hearing, Lasagna appeared in court using a cane. The entire room stood silent as she walked to the stand. Her testimony was measured, strong, and unwavering. She described her abuser not as a monster, but as a man who thought love meant ownership. And that, perhaps, was the most haunting line of the entire trial. While Larry awaited sentencing, Lasagna began using her recovery to push awareness campaigns about domestic violence. She launched a small GoFundMe, not for herself, but to help other victims find safe housing. Her videos online weren't filled with bitterness. They were filled with warning. "If you think it's just words now," she said, "those words turn into bruises and bruises turn into bullets." Those words hit home. Survivors across the country reached out, thanking her for speaking publicly. She had become a voice for the voiceless. And yet, beneath that strength, there remained an undeniable truth. Her trauma was permanent. Every sudden noise, every unfamiliar face, every news report about another woman hurt by someone she trusted brought her back to that February day. But she refused to be defined by it. As her story gained traction, lawmakers in Illinois began reviewing the enforcement of restraining orders. New proposals were introduced to flag repeat violators and improve cross-agency communication. Chicago police initiated retraining programs focused on domestic violence response, how to recognize escalation before it turns fatal. Lasagna's case had become more than just a headline. It had become a turning point. And yet behind every reform there's a cost. Hers was nearly her life. When Larry finally faced the verdict, the courtroom would hear something unexpected, something that made jurors gasp and prosecutors furious. It wasn't just about what he'd done, it was about what else he had done before. Courtrooms have a certain stillness, a cold kind of silence that only breaks when truth collides with consequence. For Lasagna Agee, that silence was the same kind that filled the Chicago streets the day she was shot. But this time, she wasn't the one bleeding. This time, her voice carried the weight of survival. Months after the attack, Larry Sistrunk stood before a judge facing charges that could lock him away for decades. The prosecution had one mission: to make sure that what he did to Lasagna and her family could never happen again. But as the trial began, new revelations surfaced, ones that made even seasoned investigators shudder. In the courtroom, prosecutors revealed that Larry's violence didn't begin with Lasagna. Other women, some from years earlier, stepped forward. Their stories mirrored the same cycle: charm, control, isolation, then violence. One woman recalled how Larry had smashed her phone when she tried to call for help. Another described being followed after she ended things with him. These testimonies painted a pattern, one of obsession that always spiraled into domination. Forensic experts testified that Larry's actions leading up to the shooting were planned, not impulsive. His car's GPS showed him circling Lasagna's block for nearly an hour before opening fire. That meant intent, premeditation. The defense tried to argue emotional breakdown, that Larry had snapped. But prosecutors countered that snapping doesn't include stalking your victim, reloading your gun, and broadcasting your confession live to the world. And as those words echoed through the courtroom, Lasagna sat quietly, hands folded. She didn't need to look at him. She'd already lived through his worst side. When the time came for her to testify, the entire room shifted. Lasagna stood slowly, supported by a cane, but her voice, steady and unwavering, commanded the air. She looked directly at the jury and said, "He told me I'd never walk again, but here I am." That single line cut deeper than any photograph or medical report could. It wasn't just testimony, it was defiance. She described how she once believed love meant patience, forgiveness, and endurance. But now she understood that love doesn't demand fear, and that leaving should never cost a person their life. When asked how she felt about Larry, Her answer silenced the courtroom. "I don't hate him. I just don't ever want to see him again." Those words weren't revenge. They were peace hard-earned through pain. When Larry finally addressed the court, his tone was hollow. He repeated the same phrase from his Facebook Live video, "I loved her dearly." But now the courtroom saw through the illusion. What he called love was never love. It was control wrapped in apology. The judge, after hours of testimony, delivered the sentence: 3 counts of attempted murder, 3 counts of aggravated battery, consecutive terms, decades behind bars. Larry barely reacted, but Lasagna exhaled, a slow, trembling breath she'd been holding since February 21, 2021. For the first time in years, she could breathe without fear. Still, justice doesn't erase scars. It only marks where healing can begin. After the trial, Lasagna returned home to a life that would never again be what it once was. Her body bore reminders of that night: 11 bullet wounds, permanent damage to her leg, and a daily struggle with pain. But she refused to be defined by those injuries. She told reporters, "If I can walk again, then I can talk again, and if I can talk, I can help somebody." And that's exactly what she did. She became an advocate for survivors of domestic violence, partnering with shelters and outreach programs across Illinois. Her message was simple but powerful: leaving isn't weakness, it's survival. Through interviews, community talks, and online campaigns, Lasagna turned her pain into purpose. She used her story to expose how easily victims slip through the cracks of the system, how restraining orders without enforcement are just paper, how victims are often told to work it out until it's too late. In the months following her case, city officials reviewed how domestic violence complaints were handled. Reports revealed multiple missed opportunities where police could have intervened. In response, Chicago's police department began implementing new training for officers, teaching them how to recognize danger patterns before tragedy strikes. Advocates pushed for laws that would flag repeat abusers who violate restraining orders. Several bills were introduced to strengthen protection for victims and increase penalties for those who defy court-issued orders. But Lasagna's greatest impact wasn't in policy, it was in hearts. She made people listen. Her interviews, often soft-spoken, carried more power than any political speech. When she said, "It's not worth it, you see me, I was shot 11 times by someone I loved," the words resonated far beyond Chicago. They echoed in shelters, in schools, in courtrooms across America. Recovery for Lasagna wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Therapy sessions became her sanctuary. Each week, she faced the trauma piece by piece. The sound of the gunshots, the Facebook video, the fear that he might somehow come back. Her young son began therapy too. He had witnessed everything. Counselors used play therapy to help him express the fear he couldn't yet put into words. They say he's resilient, just like his mother. Her grandmother and uncle, who also survived, joined her in family counseling. Together, they rebuilt what Larry tried to destroy: safety, trust, and peace. Even now, Lasagna admits the healing is ongoing. "You don't ever forget," she once said. "You just learn to live again." Her story inspired local women's organizations to launch awareness drives under the message, "Say no, stay alive." It urged women to recognize red flags and seek help early. National media outlets, including NBC Chicago and Law and Crime, spotlighted her courage, calling her a walking testimony of survival. Lasagna didn't stop there. She began mentoring other survivors privately, sharing her experience not for sympathy but for strength. Many of those women say her guidance helped them find the courage to leave. And though she rarely speaks of him anymore, she acknowledges the reality. "He took my peace for years, but he didn't take my purpose." Experts say that domestic violence is rarely spontaneous. It's a pattern that escalates with every ignored warning. And statistics show that the most dangerous time for victims is the moment they decide to leave, exactly when Lasagna tried to. Her case became a case study in how intervention often fails, not because laws don't exist, but because they're not enforced swiftly enough. Domestic violence advocates across the U.S. now reference her story in workshops, emphasizing that victims don't owe silence to anyone, not family, not community, not even fear. Today, when asked what keeps her going, Lasagna smiles and says, "My son. He saved me without even knowing it." She's learning to walk without assistance now, continuing physical therapy and working part-time again. Each step forward is proof of her resilience. Her message remains unwavering. Don't wait until it's too late. If you see the signs, speak up. If you feel trapped, reach out. You are not alone. What do you think keeps victims like Lasagna from being believed early enough? Is it fear, stigma, or the system itself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it. Someone out there might need to hear her words tonight. And if you haven't already, subscribe to True Crime Watch HD for more real-life stories that matter. Stories that remind us that behind every headline, there's a human heart fighting to survive. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and take care of one another.